Hello! We recently had a house guest. Victoria Fashion came all the way from LA to come and stay with us for a few days, but sadly, it was not long enough. I wish we could have done a live stream. I wish we could have done a video, but we only had a few days with her. And if you're not familiar with her channel, I'll link it down below. She covers the goth scene out in LA, and it's super fun to watch. So, what does a New Yorker do when they have an out-of-state house guest? Two things: pizza and bagels. Mission accomplished on both fronts, but as I said, we only had a few days, so we did do one extra thing, and we went to a goth night called Memento Mori. So, whereas it was a lot of fun, we both noticed that something was missing, and the very next night, we stayed up to about 5 o'clock in the morning having a deep discussion about what that very thing was. And what was missing is something that wasn't just indicative to this club that we went to that night. It's everywhere. It's in LA, it's in New York, and I've heard it from so many different people, and it's that magic. If you've been with me for a while, you've undoubtedly heard me refer to this infamous magic. Now, if the 90s was before your time, you probably have no freaking idea what I'm talking about. But when you walked into a goth club in the 90s, you felt as if you were leaving one world behind and then entering another. You felt like you were amongst your people, and the music wasn't only a soundtrack, it was one ingredient that helped create an entire atmosphere. There was just this sort of feeling that left you with this natural high, and it made you dread the night coming to an end. I remember that very, very vividly, just dreading the night coming to an end. And it was such a depressing feeling, but you found yourself, as you're leaving the club, you found yourself planning the next weekend. It sounds bizarre, but people would plan all week in advance for the goth club on Friday or on Saturday, and on many occasions we did have nights that happened during the week as well, but we would plan in advance. In many of the clubs, the Bank in particular, you learned how to dance small. You had no choice because, like I said, in places like the Bank, the dance floor was very packed, so you didn't have all the space to do these big turns and big arm movements because you were pretty much shoulder to shoulder with other people, so you had your little box in which you danced. I know a lot of people nowadays don't understand the importance that we had always placed on the goth clubs, like what was the big deal surrounding it. And given the state of things today, I really do understand why people do question it, but given the fact that it's a music-based subculture, where else would we go? Clubs were a really important part of being a goth for us, at least back then. It was a place where we could express our creativity, see our club friends, and club friends is a common term I remember being used because they were friends that you had only in the clubs or at special events because they lived so far away that it was really difficult to see them otherwise. It was also a place that we could come together and listen to the music that we loved, loud on a really good sound system, and just dance. What changed? What caused the decline in numbers? What caused venues to close? And what, in the places that still exist to this day, what caused that very thing that brought us together week after week to just vanish? The 90s were a really unique period in the subculture for many reasons. I went to my first goth club when I was 14. I wouldn't call it an actual goth club. They did play goth music, they did play industrial music, but I would say it was more of an alternative night. But it really was my first look into what the scene really was. It was my first real peek, and I was 14 years old. It was 1994, and it was a club called Voodoo Lounge, but the particular night was called The Shop. The Shop was an all-ages event, open every Sunday in the summertime or every Sunday the rest of the year when there's no school on Monday. However, my first legit goth night was in 1995. I was 15 years old, and it was a goth night called The Bank. Thank you, fake ID, otherwise, because it was an 18 and over event. But what I found incredibly interesting, and I didn't really think about this till after, it took a while for it to really sink in, but it was the fact that we were congregating with people that were there for Goth's inception, because at the time it didn't seem to be that big of a deal, but by today's standards it would be something huge. But we were among people that were there for Goth's inception. Say they got started around my age, 14, 15 years old. Here we are only 10 years later, and they are in their early to mid 20s to 30s. So they're still very young themselves. And that's the reason we never really saw a divide. Now today, people will view the 80s and 90s as if they're worlds apart, but back then we were together, we were one. Goth is goth, and we never really saw it any other way. So because of the old schoolers, you could still see there was very much a big influence there. And there was also the introduction of new sounds by way of ethereal music like Black Tape for the Blue Girl, Dead Can Dance, and even goth rock taking on more of a romantic and seductive quality that really not quite ushered in, but it inspired a different aesthetic. It inspired dripping bell sleeves, period clothing such as Renaissance, you had Victorian, you had Edwardian, but it was all very romantic in nature. So walking in that club, for example, you really never saw a divide. At least we never saw that divide, because despite our varying fashion preferences, you could be classic goth one day or wear something a little bit more romantic the next day without being deemed a poser. I see a lot of people nowadays picking apart the 80s and 90s as if they're entirely different things. Now, decades on, if you nitpick something, you're bound to find the differences, but back then we never did. We were goth. And as far as music is concerned, you have 80s and 90s, Vendemian Virgin Prunes. Again, we never saw that difference because it was goth. I want to show you a really good example of that integration and exhilaration between the 80s and the 90s coming together under one cloak and just not giving a fuck about whatever is going on around them and just having fun. So this is a clip from a club called The Castle in Tampa, which is still in existence to this day, but the video footage was taken in the mid-90s. I believe it was 1995, I want to say. So check it out.
Here, let me put this on you. Snap it all the way. The whole idea is to have the look of the dead.
A lot of us just did not get along well in school and, you know, considered outcasts from society just from the beginning.
Hey, I guess I'm ready.
Ready? Let's do it. The stranger the better.
A night out for Kim Sharp and Molly McCown, a chance to dress up and commune with some cadaverous friends. Friday is Gothic night at a club called The Castle in Ybor City.
Somebody was buried there yesterday.
For an outsider, the most arresting first impression is the dress. Ghostly face makeup with black liner, what you might call ashen fashion. Lots of silver accessories, often in the form of slave collars, and always the Gothic uniform of black.
Joel, let's go dance, honey.
Yeah, let's go do this.
I love the music. I feel the music. The dance is very flowy. It is like an extension of oneself.
For some, the lure of the music over the years has evolved into a lifestyle.
I have been in the scene for 12 or 14 years. I was actually part of the 80s punk movement, and it has gradually led into what is now called Gothic movement.
The Gothic movement is not characterized by religion. You'll find Christians, atheists, and yes, Satanists in this room. And if the Gothic scene is political at all, it's about the politics of free expression.
It's pretty much about life, even though it looks like it's about death. You should be able to look the way you want to look and live your life the way you want to live it. As long as you're harming nobody else, you should be able to be the person that you're meant to be.
And what to make of those who say there is beauty in darkness?
I feel you need a little bit of darkness in your life in order to properly embrace the light. Those people who go around happy all the time, to me, always seem blissfully ignorant more than anything. And to recognize a lot of darkness in people is, in a way, a better way of recognizing the beauty that's in them. I know a lot of people, they always say, well, you know, go to the castle on Friday nights. Well, that's where all the freaks go. And I'm thinking, yes, I'm proud to be one of them.
I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead.
I literally today saw an argument taking place online, and there were people arguing over the differences between goth and gothic and how important knowing the difference is, how gothic refers to a style of literature and buildings, whereas goth refers to a type of music and people. And they were really pissed off, like really getting into the semantics of it, slicing and dicing and dissecting and elaborating as to why they are so very different. This is a prime example of a point that I will be getting to, but I have to say, coming up in the decade that I did, this is an entire concept that is really lost on me, because goth and gothic, these two words were constantly used interchangeably when referring to anything in the scene. Like, goth was just an abbreviation of the word gothic. If I were to say I am a goth that listens to gothic music, I never once thought in my head, gee, I hope they didn't misunderstand me and think that I am a member of a Germanic tribe that listens to buildings. If you are referring to gothic literature, unless somebody within this exchange is an absolute moron, they will know that that's what you're referring to. They're gonna know the context. It's okay for words to have more than one meaning, but for the love of all that is sacred, please stop splitting hairs and trying to complicate something that is not meant to be complicated. So going back in the 90s, I remember seeing a lot of the people from the 80s that worked in the stores that we shopped at, be it from clothing stores, music stores. They organized events. We had mutual friends or acquaintances. We congregated in the same circles because we were all part of the same social structure. However, by today's standards, we should be worlds apart because we're living in an era where people like to put things under a microscope and dissect and just categorize things based on these tiny, minuscule little differences, where it's fine if, say, you're organizing your closet, but applying that same ideology to people really negates the whole concept of embracing one's individuality, and in the end it just results in segregation and alienation. With all of that going on, how can one feasibly enjoy themselves? Sounds like work. I mean, we can't really get mad about it because the fact that the subculture is being picked apart so much in terms of music and fashion and then these stupid ass subgenres, but it's all because it's been around for so long. Now, things are bound to change. This is inevitable because when so much time has passed, things do evolve. But when things go in a negative direction, that's not necessarily evolution. Now, that's de-evolution. And when things take that negative course, it's usually by way of misinformation or lack of information. Something got lost along the way. Something happened that ate up all that magic, and it turns out that the answer is so simple. We had it all along. In the 80s and 90s, we took that metaphorical chill pill that made it so we just didn't give a fuck. We loved goth. We loved the music. We loved the look. We loved being goth, but we knew that there was more to ourselves, more than life, than just goth. We could laugh at ourselves. We could listen to music that wasn't under the umbrella or even remotely close to being under the umbrella and have impromptu sing-alongs to Vanilla Ice, and that was okay. It was normal, but by today's standards, it would be deemed shameful and suggest a lack of authenticity. Goth is all. You eat, sleep, breathe goth, and this creates a very tense atmosphere because if you find yourself showing any semblance of individuality or any interest outside of the Gothic subculture, poser. It's not good. I want to talk about a few DJs here from the 90s, one of which is still active in New York. One of them being Ian Ford. And here's the thing about Ian Ford. He had it right. He spun on the main floor of the bank, and it was a massive space, and he could pack a dance floor. Why? He understood what it took to do it. Like a good DJ, he put a lot of his personal feelings aside and may not have played a lot of what he wanted, but he found a good middle ground. A good DJ knows that people go out to hear what they know, what they love, what they can sing along to and dance to, and just come together to create this palpable vibe in their collective elation. He knew that music was one ingredient that made the night, and then people were another. And that excitement was contagious. He knew that whether you leaned more toward goth or more toward industrial, that new wave was that bridge that connected us. And in the midst of it all, he would throw something on lesser known, but it fit the energy, and despite you not knowing what that song was, you stayed because it was good and you liked it. But then after, you would go up to the DJ booth and ask what it was, and you didn't feel afraid to do that because you didn't have that fear of being judged for not knowing what the music was. It was actually Ian Ford who introduced me to Eyes of the Nightmare Jungle. True story. DJ Jason. Now, you'd find him DJing various points all over New York, but he was most notably from Alchemy and Absolution. So the thing about his sets that made him different from Ian is that he was pure goth. But what was good about his sets is that things didn't get too samey. He didn't stick to the same sound, and there was a lot of variation, so you didn't feel bored or things didn't get repetitive. And you also didn't find him playing things just for the sake of obscurity, because a lot of DJs did actually do that. They wanted to play things for the sake of obscurity, say, you know, some random band from like Liechtenstein that nobody's ever heard of because they heard of him and you haven't. You'd never find that with him. In fact, he was always really helpful with showing people different goth music. There was a night where a conga line broke out, a night that the Cruise Shadows came. This was, I think, 98, I want to say. Don't fight to be like everybody else, because you're fighting a losing battle and you're just going to burn out in the end. An original is always worth more than a copy, and once you let go of that silly need to follow protocol, that's where the fun begins. It begins when you stop giving a fuck. You're gonna find drama and ego wherever you go. Sadly, it's been there since the beginning and it's still there today. But just know that they're few and far between, and don't let them ruin your right to enjoy yourself. It's us that make the night, and how we feel collectively is going to dramatically affect the atmosphere. Things that are important to know. Goths don't always listen to goth music. Goths don't only have other goths for friends. Goths do not judge other goths based on their music preferences. Goths do not follow specific dress codes. And finally, goths come in all races and ethnicities. So stop taking things so seriously. You'll have more fun that way, I promise. Bye.